Good morning, NDC Oslo, and welcome to the Leaders Leap, when your work becomes about people. So, as you notice, I unfortunately can't be there with you, so let's do the best of the situation and run it like this. I really hope you had an awesome conference day yesterday and that you're looking forward to today. So, in today's presentation, you're going to get a little insight into what it means to lead. And you're also going to get an insight in what it actually takes to get there. You're going to get a few things that might help you on your way. And you're going to get a few of my personal stories and experiences about going from technology into leadership. And there will be a few practical tools and principles that you may or may not find useful on your own leadership journey. So I'm Martin Mazur. I'm the CTO and co-founder of 1337. So we're a consultancy, and personally, I have 20 years of experience in the consultancy business. And the thing about that is, I'm extremely privileged that I've been able to see different types of teams. I've been able to work on different types of teams. I've been able to lead different teams. And it's all of this experience that I draw on when I do this presentation for you today. So, a little disclaimer, all of us have had different journeys up until now. And all of us will have very different journeys going forward. So, the journey I outlined today and the obstacles I'm going to talk about, you may experience some of these, you may experience all of these, or maybe you won't experience any of them. So it's going to be very personal. And the point is that there's no one way to do it. There's no one easy fix. But hopefully, there will be some things here that you can add on to your own personal tool belt, right? And that you can integrate into your own way of thinking. So let's start. This presentation is structured around a journey from tech into leadership. And depending on where you are, some of you may have already started this journey, and some of you may just be thinking about this journey. This presentation will apply slightly differently to you. The journey we're going to be looking at, I've divided up into 5 steps. There's the call, the fear, the leap, the abyss, and then finally the climb. So and in each step, I'm going to tell you a few things. There might be some stories, there might be some lessons, and there might be some strategies and tools. So let's jump into it. It all starts with you up your technology tower. And what I mean by that is you've probably done a journey into technology. And it's your personal journey. My personal journey started when I was a child. I was really, really into figuring out why Super Mario jumped on my Nintendo 8-bit. I wasn't really that good at playing video games, but what fascinated me was when I pushed that red button on the controller, why did the little guy on the TV jump? And eventually I figured out in order to do these things, I needed something called a computer. And I nagged my parents about the computer. And we weren't a really well-off family, but somehow they managed to get me the computer. And that's how my journey into technology and programming started. But that's not the only way you can get into technology and programming. I have colleagues that discovered programming in university. I have colleagues that have had a different career and then later decided to switch into software development and technology. So all the journeys here are very, very different. But what unites us is that eventually we found this love for technology. And then we built a very heavy reliance on that. We start thinking that, with this thing, this magic that I have, I can probably solve all the problems. So we're very comfortable in our little tower, right? So we've climbed that tower. We've done that for a few years. We're sitting there. We're starting to decorate that tower with all our knowledge and all the things we know. We become those experts. We've transcended the reliance on those strict rules. We know when they apply and when we can break them. We have this grasp of solutions and situations and deep understanding of how to apply our knowledge. And we also have this vision about, what is possible with technology. And at this point, we think that everything is possible with technology. We've found like the golden ticket to how life is built. And sometimes people come to us and they come for advice and they ask questions and we have the answers and it feels good. So we're really comfortable, right? We're sitting there. And then something happens, right? We sit there and we think, this can't possibly be all there is to it. There has to be something else. We have this longing and we feel that there's something missing. For me, this happened when I was working on a team, which was a C++ project. And we had written probably the perfect C++ code, or at least it felt like it was perfect. It was test driven. We had good test coverage. It passed QA. It was performant. And this team was just one of many teams working on a specific module. And we went to our PM and we were like, PM, like, we're done. Look at this. It's perfect. And the PM said, well, the other teams aren't quite there. You're slightly ahead of schedule. We have some more budget. Go back and work on your code. That's a dream scenario, like go back and work on your code. So we opened it up again, tried to make it even better, did some performance enhancing, made sure to add on even more functional tests and integration tests. And, we felt pretty good about it. And we went back to the PM and we were like, PM, like now we're really done. Like there's nothing more we can do. Like the code is perfect. And goes like, yeah, we're still slightly out of schedule. I don't know, maybe in a few weeks or so, go back and work on the code. That's when I noticed a difference in the team. All that happiness and the energy and everything, it started to dwindle. Something happened. And it wasn't about the tech, because the tech was perfect. It was about something else. So that was my calling. That was when I started to question whether technology was the end all be all. So this might be for you that you see the perfect tech and you don't realize it doesn't solve the real issues, or doesn't solve the issues of your users or your business. Or it might be that you see people around you just not feeling well or not being motivated to do the work. Or you just might be feeling that there is a better way to do these things. So you go looking, right? And that's the call. So the call is when you go out on the balcony on your tower and you look out and you start seeing other things appear in the distance that you first missed or that you first disregarded. Your perspective, it broadens. One of the things that you might be seeing, one of the reasons you might be in this talk, is that you see that tower of leadership. And a little bit further away, there might be a tower of management. And sometimes those two towers are confused. And we'll talk a little bit about what is leadership and what it's not in a while. But the thing is, what's important to note here is that these are distinctively different towers. And the reason I'm being specific about that is because they require a specific, a new climb. You have to start over and you have to go up that tower again. It's not a continuation of the journey you've been on so far. It's not a continuation of the skills you have. It's a different set of skills and it's a different and it's a different climb. So let's talk a little bit about what is leadership and also what it's not. So when I talk about leadership, I talk about the people that are able to set out a vision for themselves and visualize what you need to create or where you need to go. It's not about authority. It's not about telling people to go somewhere. It's about painting that picture of what could be possible and then evangelizing it. So that means going first and helping others see what you see, inspiring them to see what you see, to join you on your journey. Because leadership is about facilitating a voluntary movement of people in a certain direction. It's not about telling them to follow, it's about inspiring them to follow. So, in contrast, leadership is about going first and pulling people with you, not as management, which is pushing people, telling them to go first. And leadership is also about attitudes. And in that, you might put stuff like principles or priorities. And what that means is you have to be the change that you want to see. So if you want to see something change, you do it first, and you show people how it's done. And furthermore, leadership, that's something you do. It's not something you are. And that's tricky for some people to understand, because you don't necessarily need the title of lead or leader in order to lead. Because it's an act, right? It's not a role or it's not a title. And what makes it really tricky is also leadership is in itself several different skills that go down into psychology and group dynamics and some type of management skills and some type of coaching. And there's a bunch of these different things that are bundled up into this one word. So it's actually pretty complex. It's not like going out and learning a new programming language, which might be very distinct. And depending on where you are and who you are, you might need to develop different skills. But one thing that if you look at right now is that it's also one of the most sought after features of any software professional today. So if for no other reason you choose to develop leadership skills, you can do it just because it's a good career move, right? Because that is one of the things that people are looking for when they're looking to employ senior software professionals, where those are developers or testers or whatever. So you hear that calling. So whatever reason you do hear that calling, like for me, as I told you, it was I wanted to build better products. I wanted to do things that mattered. I wanted to spend my time in a way that mattered. And I wanted my colleagues to spend their time in a way that mattered. I didn't want to be on teams that created software that, because of poor leadership, was never released, or because of poor leadership was released and then didn't meet the needs of the business or the users. And that was what got me started. And the next thing that happens once you decide to start is you encounter the fear, right? And the fear is that feeling when you're standing there and looking at that other tower and you're thinking, oh, I should go there. And there's something in the back of your head saying like, well, but should I? And there's two types of fear, or maybe there's more, but there's two types of distinct fear. The one is the fear that you create. One is the fear that you create yourself. And that's the stuff we sometimes call self-doubt. Those are the things we tell ourselves. This is going to be hard. I don't know how to do this. I will never learn how to do this. This is not within my personality to do these types of things. It might be the worst career move I've ever done. I should probably just stay put where I am. And those things happen for a reason, right? Fear has been developed in us as people to avoid really scary things. Like in the Stone Age, when we lived in caves, we were afraid of going out because there might be a saber-toothed tiger that wanted to eat us. Today, that's not really the case. But regardless, it feels very real. And we start talking ourselves down from the ledge. We start talking ourselves down from actually taking the leap from jumping. There's a few things you can do if you experience this. One of the best tools that I've personally found is visualization. And there's two types of visualization. There's past visualization and there's future visualization. So the way past visualization works is you think back to the last time you felt the fear. You think back to the last time you had that doubt and you were standing in front of something really hard, and you did it anyway and you succeeded. You think about that moment and you take that feeling that you have now and you bring it into the now. You bring it to now and you think, if I could do it then, I can do it now, and you kill some of those self-doubts. The other type of visualization is future visualization. And that is all about thinking about how it looks when you're there. How does it look when you're leading? How are you working? How does your work look? What are you doing differently? How are you, and all those things. And then when you have that dream picture, when you painted that idea, you bring it back to now and you act, right? Because that's the mistake a lot of people do. They do the forward visualization. They dream about how it will look when they get there. And then they don't do anything about it. So the most important thing is you pick up the next step once you've done that. And it's like saying, I want to lose weight and dreaming about going to the gym or being thin. But it all starts with like picking up your gym clothes and going out the door. So that's what I mean about taking the first step. And the second fear is slightly different, right? Because it comes from others. And these are the things other people will tell you. And this might be your peers. A lot of people inside, especially inside software development community, have this weird view of leadership, and they go like, yeah, we don't really need leaders. Like, what's that for? And you're such a great software developer. Are you sure you want to do this? You've been great. Like, why are you even looking at this? So it might be your peers, but it might even be managers, because they might know that if you go this route, if you start looking into these things, maybe they'll lose you from their team. Maybe you'll be promoted and have to go to another team, or maybe you will switch jobs because you found something else somewhere else. But then it might also be friends and family, because this is like a big thing that happens. They think about, you have this cushy job, you're actually earning pretty well, you're doing your 40-hour work weeks, and this seems like a lot of responsibility and something that's going to be hard, and you're going to have to, do extra hours or whatever, or maybe it's a bad career step and you're going to end up in between jobs or whatever. And there might be pressure from that circle of people around you. So this is the best thing you can do about this is to treat all those comments as feedback. And then go learn how to take feedback. This is going to be useful for you as a leader. So here's my trick. What I do when I get feedback is I treat it as a gift. So you accept the feedback, take it in as a gift, you open it up, and you do as you do when you get a gift. You say thank you to the person offering you the feedback. You say, thank you so much for taking the time to tell me this. Then you look at the gift and you look, what is this exactly? And what do I want to do with it? You can choose to take that gift and kind of integrate it into yourself and be like, this is a really good gift. I should really wear it as close to my heart and carry it with me. Or you can think, well, it's a kind of okay gift. It might be useful. You can just take it and put it on a shelf behind you and save it for later and maybe look at it. It might come in handy at some point. Or, and this is completely fine to do with gifts, you take and you say like, this is not for me. This is not useful. This is not something I need. And you put it in a trash bin, right? And if you're really courageous when you get that feedback, you can also be curious. So even if somebody says something that you strongly disagree with or that you find offensive, you can start asking questions about that. So that's interesting. Like, why are you saying that? Like, what makes you say that? And where did that come from? And not in an arguing way. Never argue about that feedback, but in a curious way to understand the deeper meaning. Because maybe there's something in there, maybe there's a real concern that you need to deal with. All right, so assume that you've dealt with the fear. You've dealt with the fear of yourself and you've dealt with the fear of others. Now you're ready to take the leap. You're ready to cross over that ledge. So we come to the leap, right? And this looks different for a lot of people. And there's 3 ways this might happen. One is the obvious way. You jump. You make the decision, you've maybe already made it, or you made this decision when you exit this room, and you just jump. You just go over the ledge voluntarily and start digging into leadership and what that means and how you're going to develop leadership. Another way, which happens quite often, is you get pushed. And what this means is that somebody around you decides that, I want you to go into leadership. And that might be a manager, usually a manager saying, hey, you know what? I think you should become tech lead, or I think you should become test lead. What do you think about that? And I've pushed a few people in my career. And the thing is, if your manager is good and they ask you that question, they think you're ready. So you should think you're ready too. I've never pushed anyone that I didn't think was ready to lead. And if your manager or your leader is any good, they'll also support you every step of the way in this journey. So that might be the best thing that happens to you, right? So think about that when somebody decides to push you. You might want to kind of voluntarily go into the jump as well. Next thing that happens is what happened to me. You kind of trip into leadership. You don't have a conscious idea that, I want to go into leadership, I want to develop these skills, but they kind of accidentally happen to you. So you remember I was telling you about that team. And what I did there is I picked up my first Agile book. And I started reading about Agile and how that works. And that led me to psychology and people and team dynamics and bettering myself and talking to people and presentation skills and selling and all of these things. And each time I did something, it wasn't because I wanted to learn it. It was because I saw a real problem in the team or the context I was working with. And I specifically studied just to solve that problem. And then as that kind of progressed, I started seeing that I was getting this role on teams where people were looking to me to make the first move. And when I did, they followed. And I was like, wow, this just kind of happened to me. And it's not always going to be this distinct. It's not always going to be like jump, push, or trip. It might be a mix of them. Like you might go think about jumping and somebody pushes you, or you might be tripping already and then you just go like, heck, I'm going to jump. So it's not always that distinct, right? It is this weird mix. But somehow you will end up at the bottom of that technology tower. And what can happen at this point, and if this happens to you, you need to know that that's okay. What happens at this point is some people get really scared at the bottom of that tower and go like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And they run right back up the technology tower. That's cool. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to run right back up that tower. You might jump later on. You might jump in a year or two again. You might leap when the time is ready. So this can happen for people and go up and decide to go over the ledge again. Or maybe you go up and you never go over again, and that's cool too. So whatever happens is supposed to happen. So don't be too hard on yourself if you decide to chicken out at this point. But if you don't, we're moving into the abyss. And this is a pretty scary place. So the abyss is that place between the technology tower and the leadership tower. You're up neither tower, and it's dark, and it's raining, and it's damp, and it sucks. This is what Seth Godin calls the dip, or some others call the valley of despair. The journey up until now has been pretty exciting. There's been a lot of cool stuff going on. Of course, it's been scary, but there's new things. I'm working on myself. I'm discovering new things. I'm kind of dealing with people around me, doing things I haven't done before. But now it just becomes this long lug from one place to another before you can start that climb. You have to be able to take that because it's easy to lead, but what's hard is actually getting there. So now you're feeling the first symptoms of this is going to suck. And it's also scary because you're not up either tower. So you're missing your technology tower. You're being like, oh, it was really cozy and nice back there. Remember that room we made for ourselves? But you're not nowhere near the leadership tower. So right now you're stuck in this abyss. And To get out from the abyss, that starts with you. And there's a few things you're going to have to deal with in the abyss, and this is the reason it's pretty dark. First, you're going to have to deal with your identity or your ego. And what I mean about that is the things you do are not who you are. But inside of software, especially if you're a software developer, we get a lot of praise for what we do. We get a lot of confirmation for what we do. That was some great code, or that was a great product, or that was whatever. And when you get that praise, that builds your self-esteem and it adds on to that identity. We have a really strong culture inside of software development. Everything from the user groups to the conferences to how we dress to what things we like, what pastimes we have. So a lot of people strongly identify with, this is me. I'm a software developer. I'm a software tester. That's how I am, and that's who I am. And it's not entirely your fault, because that comes from the type of confirmation you've been getting. The other type of confirmation you can get is the confirmation for who you are. You're such a nice person. You're so empathetic, or you're a good friend, or you're the best colleague I've ever had. We very rarely get that type of confirmation. But that type of confirmation, it builds self-esteem. And that's different. So if you're only full of self-confidence and you lack self-esteem, shedding your kind of identity as a software professional, software developer, software tester, in order to make room or being a software leader is going to be really hard. If you want to see how a lot of self-esteem looks, look at children. If you have children, if your friends have children, look at how they approach new things. Ask a child, do you need help with this? They're like, no, I'm going to do it by myself. And at some point, that 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old knows they will fail at that task. But it doesn't matter, because they have so much self-esteem. They're like, I'm great and I can do this. So if you're feeling these things, how do you build that self-esteem in order to be able to drop your developer identity? Well, there's a few different ways of doing this. And here's one, this is kind of morbid, right? So if you're not psychologically in a good place, please don't do this. But if you are, this works really well. So what you do is you visualize your funeral. You visualize that you're dead. And however that looks for you, some might want a coffin, some might want a urn, some might want a church, and somebody else has a different building they want to be in. Whatever way that looks for you, you visualize that you just died and you're there. And people start showing up, and then they do speeches. So you envision who comes to my funeral, and it doesn't have to be realistic. It can be people that are older than you and stuff like that. And people come there, and then you imagine, what are they saying in their speech? Right? Because if you think about funeral speeches, those rarely talk about what people did. They always talk about how people were or what they were, right? And then you write those things down, and now you kind of have a little template about, this is me, and you can build your self-esteem using that. Another way is simply going out and asking people. Asking your friends or your spouse or even your managers and people you work is like, what do you like about me? Like, not what I do, but about me. That might be scary for some people. But the next thing here is also about you, but it's about leading yourself. So one thing I sometimes hear is, I would love to go into leadership, but nobody's asked me, or I don't have a team, or I don't have anybody who leads. But the opportunity to lead is always there. There's always people looking for leaders and for causes to join. But more specifically, you can always start your leadership journey by leading yourself. Always start here. And one thing you should do is you should think about, how are you as a leader to yourself? This means, how are you talking to yourself when you do good things, when you succeed? What are you saying to yourself? Your inner voice. When you fail, what are you saying to yourself? When you're unmotivated, what are you saying to yourself? Like all these things, like how are you holding yourself accountable for the things that you promised yourself to do? And you write that down and then you look at it and you see like, is this acceptable leadership behavior? Like if my leader was doing this, would I accept that? Would that be good leadership? I, Chances are it's not, because our inner voices are pretty mean and they're pretty horrible for most people. So you need to deal with that. You need to figure out, how am I supposed to kind of deal with these things? And one practice you can do is designate time to improve yourself. Set out 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever you can cut out from your daily routine to work on yourself. And you can use techniques that you're familiar with already. So if you're in this talk, if you're thinking about leadership, if you've had that role on a team, chances are you've held an agile retrospective. So the same techniques you use for holding agile retrospective, they also apply to holding personal retrospectives. So you can use that to kind of look at, what am I good at? Where do I need improvement? What are things I should start doing? What are things I should stop doing? What are the top priorities for next week or the next 2 weeks that I'm going to be working on? And kind of do that as a self-improvement project. And the last thing here is about finding your why. And finding your why can be done in several different ways. And there's a lot of good literature about that. There's Simon Sinek's Starting with Why. There was the Business Model Me book. And there's a bunch of other books talking about, finding that reason. And what I mean about that reason is there's this story about three people carrying stones down a road. And somebody goes up to them and says to the first person, so I see you're carrying stones. So what are you doing? And he says, well, it's obvious. I'm carrying a stone. What do you think? Ask the second person, so how about you? What are you doing? Well, I'm providing for my family. And ask the third person, so what are you doing? And that person looks at him and says, I'm building a cathedral. So you need to figure out why you're doing the things that you're doing. And that can't be, I'm doing them simply because I am doing them. It can't be, I'm doing them because, I need money to pay rent and buy food for my family. It has to be, what's your cathedral? What's your cause? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? That can take some time. And the last thing in the abyss is about committing to actually doing the investment of going into leadership. Because one thing you won't get more of is time. We all get the same amount of time, same 24 hours. So what you can control is where you put your time. What I mean about that is you're going up this entirely new tower. There's a lot of things you need to learn up that tower. You have to be okay by not investing in your old tower, by not investing in the technology tower. I see a lot of people wanting to go into leadership and they try to do both. And they just simply can't manage because you can't keep up with all the tech stuff and also learn all these new leadership skills that you need to be learning. So you need to be able to reallocate your resources, saying the majority of the time I spend on learning new things is going to be in this leadership tower. And I'm going to be okay with kind of falling behind on the tech stuff. And the reason that is scary, because you're going to come to a point where the tech stuff is kind of dwindling down and you're not keeping up and the leadership stuff isn't really on par. So at that moment in time, you're just kind of bad at both. And that's why that is really scary to committing to that investment. All right. So say we've done this, we've dealt with ourselves, we've committed to doing the investment, and we're starting to climb. So this is when you start going up that leadership tower. You really start being able to use the skills that you have to lead others. You might be in informal leadership roles. And the number one issue new leaders run into is the issue of how does work actually look? When I go into my job, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? And the reason this trips up a lot of people is because this thing that you've just went from contributor to catalyst, meaning you went from that the value you provide to your team or your company comes from the things I actually create and I ship, to the value that I create for my team or my company comes from the way I support and inspire other people to create things that they ship. So you go from that individual contributor role to the catalyst. The things that you do don't matter anymore in sense of production. What matters is how much better do you make the people around you? And there's a few things, and the reason this becomes an issue for a lot of people is because they really try to do both. A lot of new leaders, they go in and they think, I'm not only supposed to be the inspiring person that goes first and sets all the visions and does all the things and supports my team. I'm also supposed to be the best contributor on my team, because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to write the best code and ship most code and do most code and do most features and everything. And they go into overdrive, work late hours, and eventually burn out. So you need to be okay with finding yourself in a catalyst role, because you won't be up to par on the tech. And chances are, if you've done leadership correctly, a lot of people on your team are currently better at the technology than you are. So what does this mean? Well, it means, for me, the trick I did, because I went into this spiral, I tried to be all those things. The trick that I did when I noticed this was I kind of made a deal with myself. There will not be a single commit in our Git repository with my name on it. That doesn't mean I don't work on code. That doesn't mean I don't help out. It just means I don't own those things. Because if I can't commit code, I can't pull stories on the Kanban board or Scrum board or whatever either. So now I have to wait for somebody else to pick something up. And I could go to them and be like, hey, can I work with you on this? Or do you want a pair program? Or do you need help on this? And we can work on that together. Because then if I need to take care of something, I'm not owning that feature. I'm not owning that code. Somebody else is. This was a great thing for my team, because this is the first time I really saw my team rise to the occasion of taking, being empowered and taking accountability for what they ship. And the second thing I've seen, and this is for people that maybe are architects or have an architect role, they usually do this, is that they decided, I'm going to build a framework. I'm going to build like the core of the application. And I'm just going to have my team like build stuff around that. That's also a really bad mistake. That code and that core, that's going to burn. And it's going to burn when you least have time to fix it. And nobody else is going to know how it works. Nobody else is going to dare to open it up and mess with it. And you're going to be busy doing other things. So it's going to end up being you on evenings and weekends trying to fix that stuff, because right now you're blocking your team. You're not really leading them. So you really need to get out of that production mindset and shift to making sure that you're a catalyst for your team. And next thing is the idea that you're supposed to adapt to others. Since doing leadership is a lot of introspection, it's a lot about thinking about yourself and your own things. When you start leading others, you need to understand that in your role as a leader also is the responsibility to meet people where they are and pick them up where they are. And this means making sure that you understand that everybody is unique, everybody has unique strengths, everybody has a unique personality. There's these different people. And there's not one way of talking to or being with those people. And they need different things from you as a leader. And it's your responsibility to make sure you can provide that. So one thing, for instance, is never take out an introvert to a cafe or a lunch for a serious talk, right? So if you have a one-on-one, most introverts prefer doing that in like a calm office setting somewhere away from people. And while extroverts might be really cool with going out to cafes or on a lunch and having their one-on-ones. And same thing, if some extroverts really prefer like a phone call for check-in or a face-to-face meeting, well, you might want to send a Slack message to some people on your team. And this is not just about introverts and extroverts. I'm using that as an example. All people have these different abilities and want to be approached differently. So it's about reading the person and figuring out what works for this person, and then meeting them where they are and picking them up where they are. And this also comes down to this idea here that, about situational leadership. So this model of situational leadership, it's about using two different leadership styles. It's about using the directive leadership style, and then there's the supportive leadership style. And the difference is the directive is more about, hey, I think you should be doing this. And the supportive is more about, so what do you think? And my biggest mistake was I came from agile leadership. So I was doing the supportive leadership style 100% of the time. And that was working really well with senior people or people that have worked for a while and have some skill. But I was miserably failing with people that were juniors. I was like, what am I doing wrong? And then somebody showed me this and said, depending on your skill level, motivation and skill will vary. So when you're starting out and you're very new to something, you have really high motivation, but you also have really low skill. So those people, you need to help them and give them direction to show them where they should put their energy. Being like, hey, I want you to really work on this. I want you to really do this. And I want you to do it in this specific way. And I'm going to come back at the end of the day and we can look at it together. Well, and then as the people progress, you can move to a more coaching style because now their motivation starts to dwindle, but they have more skill. So then it's more about still giving them kind of the box to navigate inside, but inside of that box, you can give them some more freedom and you can still help them make the tough decisions. Later, when they become even more senior, there's this idea of they have most of the skill and they really have some motivation, and you can be completely supportive. You can just go in on that more coaching. What do you think? How would you solve this problem? So who would you ask about this? And really not providing any answers. And then when people reach that last step, when they become the experts, they have high motivation, high skill. You can basically just use them as your peers, as a leader, being like, I don't know, you don't know, but you run with it. I know you'll figure it out. And they really don't need that much more from you. So if you have people like that and you're a leader, you should make sure to push them because that's what good leaders do. Because now it's time for them to start their journey, to take their next step. And the next thing I'm going to talk to you about here is managing time. Because as we said, there's always more things to deal with and there's time available and everybody gets the same amount of time. You get the same amount as I do, as the leaders you look up to do. And the thing is, what great leaders do, what good leaders do, is they figure out how to wisely use that time to maximize the outcome of the work that their team is doing. And the thing about this is that as you progress in your leadership journey, you will get bombarded by stuff. Because now all of a sudden you're in charge of managing your own time. Nobody else is going to deal with that for you. And you need to be able to sort through all those things and seeing like, what do I do and what don't I do? And there's tons of strategies for this. There's a lot of tools for this. One of the things that really is useful to me, at least, is the Eisenhower matrix. It's a super simple, really easy tool that talks about things that are important and urgent. They're the things you should manage. They're things you have to do right here, right now. Stuff is on fire. Something's not working. Somebody's not feeling really well. You deal with that here and now. It's important and it's urgent. Then there's the things that are important but aren't urgent. And these are the things you should long-term be working on. This should be your long-term to-do list. Those are the things you should prioritize. But those are usually the things that you don't prioritize because they're really hard to deal with and they're big and you don't know what to do with them. And you always find something else to kind of fill that space. And then there's the things which are not important and urgent, and these are usually the things that you fill that space with. I need to answer this message or this phone call or do this thing or whatever. And you should minimize doing those things. One way of minimizing them is having somebody else do it. And when you think about that, these are things that are not important to you, but they might be important to someone else. So this is where delegating and telling people, I can't do it, but maybe somebody else can, or I don't have the solution for this, but you should check with Jenny. Jenny's really good on this, and talk to her. And then there's the things which are just not important and not urgent. And this is your Twitter feeds, your Facebooks, your whatever other stuff, Ars Technica, you might be spending your time on. Do those things if you have extra time, or do those things if you need to relax for a while. But be mindful of how much of that you do, because that's really the thing that can destroy your time management. And then you really need to set aside time for doing work. I see a lot of new leaders going into this, and then people start discovering that the leaders, especially when they get formal leadership roles like tech lead, they're pulled into meetings, and they don't set aside 30 minutes after that meeting to kind of think about, what were the real action points? What were we talking about? What do I need to take away from this? Right? So make sure you block out time in your calendar for things like self-improvement, meeting follow-up, one-on-ones, everything. Because if work is just banging on you and you don't have an agenda, that's going to be tough. And a lot of people don't do this. And it's really, if you don't know how much stuff you have, it's infinite stuff. So last thing I'm going to talk about in this segment, in this talk here, almost the last thing, is how you present yourself. I think this might be the most controversial topic in this whole talk, but the way you present yourself outwards actually matters a lot. There's three things. First, there's the language you use. So if your customer or your PO comes to you and says, hey, I want you to do this thing, and it's a real shit feature, and you already feel it, you're like, oh, this is going to suck so much. When you go to your team and you go like, hey team, I just talked to the PO, you really want us to build this thing. I know it sucks for me, it sucks for you, but like, somebody really needs to kind of do that tomorrow. Versus you go to your team and you go like, all right team, so I just talked to the PO, I have this feature coming up. I know it's not like the optimal thing to do, and there's probably better ways of solving what they're trying to achieve. So tomorrow, I really want us to rally around this problem and figure out what the best way to solve it might be. And if we figure out a better way of doing that than what they're suggesting, I'll personally go and talk to them and see if we can push that through. So it's not just about the words I used, right? It's also about how I approached it, my face and body language and where I was. I don't know if you noticed that on camera, but that really matters, because that's going to tell your team whether they should be inspired to do this hard thing that everybody knows sucks. You don't have to tell them it sucks, they know. Or if they should be let down and kind of, oh, we really have to do this. That's what leadership is about. Second thing is the behavior. If you show up to meetings late, your team is going to show up to meetings late. If you constantly slip on your commitments, forget things, your team's going to slip on their commitments and they're going to forget things. Because people do as others do. They don't do what they're being told. So, make sure that you have the behaviors that you want your team to have. Otherwise, that's going to be really hard for you. And the last thing, this is probably the most controversial, and that's clothing and kind of generally how you physically present yourself. And I don't mean you should kind of drop your own personal style and be like, I'm this gray goo leader thing. I just mean that depending on what context you're going to be in as a leader, you might want to dress for that context. If you're going into a room where people have business clothing, you might want to be able to have business clothing. Find your own flavor of business clothing, but do that, or smart casual or whatever. And that might mean different things, that different companies and different cultures. It might mean a shirt or a blouse, or it might mean something else. And to illustrate why this is important is imagine you're having a person joining your team tomorrow. So a person is joining your team, let's call him John. And John walks in with a really expensive and nice suit, crocodile leather shoes, expensive Rolex on his wrist. Even before you've talked to John, what do you think about John's programming skills? We all carry these prejudices with us. Like we kind of think about like, yeah, that's not gonna work out. Or he's like a mole or a CIA agent or something. Like he's just here to kind of mess with us. And that same thing goes for leaders, right? So if you enter a room and you're wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie, you're gonna have to spend the next 20 minutes convincing people that you know what you're talking about. And you have to decide for yourself if you think it's worth that time, or if you should just go and figure out, some different things to wear. And, this has happened to me so many times, and then I just decided like it's not worth the battle. So, I just decided to figure out a new clothing style. So the cover matters. And, the book might be good, but the cover matters. So since this is a leadership talk and it's a lot about you, I'm going to now give everybody here 2 minutes to start their own leadership journey or improve on your leadership journey. So here's 2 minutes for you to kind of think about 3 things that are important for you to take away from today's talk. I'm just going to be quiet and you think about it and you write it down on a piece of paper on your phone or computer or whatever. I'll continue in 2 minutes. So make sure to figure out 3 things. Okay. So here's a 4th thing. So if you don't have this already on your list, I really want you to add it. And it is that leading starts with yourself. Contrary to what a lot of other people believe in, what I'm trying to send, the message I'm trying to send in this talk is that leading doesn't start with others. It starts here. Just to reiterate the journey, and here's the last surprise. So we've been through the call, the fear, the leap, the abyss, and the climb. There actually is a 6th step, and it's called the return. So the return, that happens when you're up the leadership tower and you're building your comfortable leadership tower just as you used to have it in the technology tower, but better. What I want you to do then is I want you to stand on that balcony. I want you to look back at who you used to be in that technology tower and remember that person. I really want you to remember that person because that's the person you're leading now. The people around you, they think the things that you thought back then. And they have the same sentiments as you had back then. And they have the same struggles as you had back then. This is something a lot of leaders forget. When they get up their leadership tower, they forget where they came from and they forget what that was about. But great leaders, they remember and they value that and they use that experience. So here's our journal. Here's the things we've went over in this talk. So find your reason to lead. Build your self-confidence, learn to take feedback, cross the threshold, rebuild your identity, lead yourself first, reallocate your resources, become a catalyst, adapt to the needs of others, manage your time, present yourself, and remember who you are and where you came from. That's really important. Thank you so much. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take that. I also have questions here. All right, cool. So I have two questions here. So have you seen many people do the leap back from the leadership tower to the technology tower? Um, no, I actually haven't seen that. And I think the reason is because once you start leading, you might not formally want to be a leader, but you still kind of informally are. So I have a lot of people around in my organization, for instance, that take on roles in like empowered product teams, and that requires a lot of self-guidance. And you can see that other people look up to them, and they're really good at coaching and leading them. So they might not want to have a formal leadership role, but the skills that they learn are still kind of with them, right? So I haven't really seen that in that sense. From developer to tech lead or development manager is one thing, but what if this job also includes other responsibilities at your company, like HR? Um, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I fully get it, but I'll try to kind of answer it the best I can. I mean, if this is about HR in the sense that you're a manager and you have to manage people and deal with their salaries and career progressions and things like that, I mean, that's the managerial work. But if it actually means dealing with, actual HR things like, writing the employee handbook or dealing with people that are burnt out or job training or parental benefits and things that would be classically HR. I should probably kind of have training for that if you're because that's a completely different career, right? So I think that's a tricky thing, and you should definitely not then pair that with being HR and tech. I think that might be hard, but if you're doing development manager, there are elements in that would might be perceived as HR. I'm not sure if that was what the question was going for. Any other questions? Feels like we're done. Thank you so much for listening to my talk, and come to my next talk if you think this was interesting. Bye.